awakening is everything, and because of that, it's invisible. It's funny because I could say the same thing about disability. And why I balk at using both of those words, that there's something that doesn't feel quite right about either classification. Classifying some experience as awakening or some experience as disability. The reality that was talked about when I was talking about awakening as everything is everything. It's not a thing. You could say it's a process, but the mind can even then make a process into a thing. But it's the closest thing that I've found. It's what I did my doctoral work on how we tend to want to make these important things in life discrete, concrete, measurable outcomes or arrival points, like love, happiness. The identity isn't really like the idea of process, of ongoingness, of everything's always changingness. That is the truth of what's awakened to in awakening, of this is the only moment I ever have, and it's already gone, and so it's this one, and it's this one, and all of the falling aways that really happen with that when we're really in it. And I feel the same about disability as a process. It's so clear for myself in the specific form of relapse, remitting, but also progressing, fluctuating with environment, stress, sickness, like intense fluctuations. It's so dramatic here. I don't know why. There's no why. But it just is in this particular form. So it's really clear here. That disability is a process, and it's been seen through my MS that it's not just my MS. I'm disabled by many things. By being a parent when I was postpartum, by getting sick with COVID, by twisting my ankle, by disability is part of all of our lives. Our abilities fluctuate. Our bodies fluctuate. So I hesitate to label anything because there's always going to be a misunderstanding of what it means. That disability means a certain thing and it only belongs to a certain kind of people. And yes, it's true in our culture and in our world. The label can be helpful with long-term, permanent and I put that in quotes, but it's also, for some of us, it is permanent. Like, it is part of the body. In a real way, loss of a limb, that's permanent, right? And there is impermanence in life manifesting into that in a certain way. It's both. So for some of us, that is part of the identity and the personal experience. The awakening is just seeing that that's not all that's here, and that identity isn't separate from anything else. And so disability is never, maybe I shouldn't say never, but is not often wanted, and so it can be very destructive to identity in a spiritually liberating way, if we allow it. If it's allowed to be felt. It's not that there's someone can or can't allow it, but if there's enough suffering and it works on us enough, it works on us. The me that was there before is seen differently, understood differently. Which brings me into really what wanted to be named as the invisible part of what I have named this channel, these offerings. Invisible awakenings, in that because awakening is everything, it's not seen. Because disability is in everything, it's not seen. It's not seen for many reasons, but part of it is the pervasiveness of it. The ordinariness of it. There's so much social conditioning around separating out from what you really have been taught that you shouldn't be. Because disability is so misunderstood. And also so fear-inducing for people, a feeling of threat to life, unhealthy contagion, even if that's not logical, being associated with a health outcome. There's a lot of fear on a biological level there, and so we separate. And so when we see clear disability and othering, we are even more separate. And what I see, and let's see if this can be articulated. There was a passage from, I'm going to forget his name, Perfect Brilliant Stillness, Cars, when he talked about meeting someone on the street with some person begging for money or soliciting, or maybe just showing up in a certain place, where his description of the person, there was a very clear disability there, whether cognitive, visual, auditory, or something else. It was clear that this person was disabled. And he was rolling down his window to maybe give money to this man or to just engage with him in some way, and they made eye contact. And Kars is writing from a place of a non-dual realization. And he made eye contact with this man and saw the most absolute, clear nothingness that he'd seen. And then an instant later, he was gone. And I wonder if it takes realization in that way, to be able to see that in someone with that sort of disabling condition that really dramatically removes them from mainstream functioning in a certain way, whether it's verbal, visual, cognitive, physical paralysis. When we can get past the fear of what that brings up, how much love and openness and presence do we experience from people living with those conditions, who in some way haven't had the same journey with identity, maybe a very different one, maybe a very challenging one in different ways, or maybe none. Maybe that blowing open liberation is a birthright to certain states of being physically and mentally in this world. I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm not surmising, and I would say the kind of awakeness that I see in few and far between speakers on these subjects, I've probably only experienced outside of spiritual talk and community in people with disability. Nothing comes to mind right now outside of that. We don't have to be on a spiritual path to separate out from, that's funny language. We don't have to be on a spiritual path to realize that we're not separate. I'm not saying a spiritual path is bad, but in the same way as therapy, the wrong spiritual path can provide a lot more work to be interpreted and unlearned. It can be very confusing, can be very distracting. And I think disability is invisible as a form of awakening too. Because we're not looking to it. It's never been talked about in that way. John Karsh, is the only person I've ever heard mention that in that way. In that way. Maybe others have, and I just haven't been exposed, but what would it threaten if we questioned who our teachers were and weren't? Maybe nothing, but if something, then that is worthy of inquiry. Nothing is separate. And if it is, then it's not. It's not what it's looking for. Stop looking. It's the process of stopping looking and seeing what's already there. And seeing these people and these forms of life that have been dismissed as not a teacher. It feels very strong here. That it is a deep hope here that this content is not just for people who are living within through a certain kind of disability, that it's for all people, that this is a teacher for everyone. And I'm sure it will be dismissed and balked at. That's just going to be expected in this process, but I hope, well, it doesn't matter what I hope, but the aliveness is resonant with the possibility that people without disability will begin to see what has been invisible and the value, and bringing light to it, or at least questioning what is invisible in this process.